Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and this is Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com, streaming live educational and civic engagement on the internet and Oceanic Channel 16. Today we're discussing the major items on the agenda for the 2016 legislative session. Here to enlighten us is Hawaii State Representative Chris Lee, Chair of the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee. Representative Lee was born and raised in Kailua. He attended Iolani School and later Oregon State University, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science. Chris Lee has represented District 51, which includes Kailua and Waimanalo, since 2008. Among many of his accomplishments in 2014, Representative Lee sponsored the on-bill financing law that now provides middle and low-income homeowners the option to have a solar system installed on their rooftops with no upfront cost and pay it down right on their existing electric bill. Chris helped navigate the issues between our state's monopoly utility company and the solar industry and customers to allow more integration of rooftop solar into the grid. And this year, Chris sponsored the landmark bill that now requires Hawaii be 100% powered by renewable energy by 2045. Chris also founded the Local Food Caucus, Hawaii's first officially recognized working group in the legislature specifically focused on increasing local food production. Also joining us is Richard Wallsgrove. He is Program Director of the Blue Planet Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to clear the path for 100% clean energy in Hawaii. Welcome, Richard and Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Chris, in particular, because I know you're getting ready for the legislative session that opens tomorrow, and you squeezed us in.
I literally walked in seconds ago, but glad to be here.
Terrific. So we're going to bombard you with some questions as you tell us what's the hottest on your agenda, and Blue Planet's, I know, also has similar interest for this session. And we want to make sure our viewers are well aware of what's going on and how they can participate. So the first thing I want to ask you is about the 100% clean renewable energy law, which is absolutely cutting edge, and Hawaii is for the rest of the country. How are we going to do this? What are the things what are the next steps?
You know, it is a first step, you're right. And I think one of the great things about Hawaii is that we have natural resources unlike almost every other state. So we've got already 1 in 3 single family homes that have PV on their roofs. We've got tremendous amount of wind and geothermal power on the neighbor islands, and it's really bringing all these resources to bear and using innovative new technology like batteries to help store the power that we're producing during the day so that we can use it at night and really create a much more distributed energy grid for the future in which anybody can generate power and share it with their neighbors, and we can all do this together and save money in the long run.
Are there any tweaks we need to make in this session to that bill, or are we ready?
There likely are. You know, I think one of the things that we did this past year with this law was we basically changed the goalpost. We were on target to be roughly about 40% renewable by 2030, and we moved that to 100% by 2045. But within that definition, there's clarification so that I think we can all agree we want to be 100% renewable, and 100% means all our electricity being produced on the island comes from renewable energy. And that's something that right now is a little bit fuzzy in the definition, and it's incredibly technical, so I'm going to stay away from it. But suffice it to say, there is room for improvement, and I think everybody's in agreement that we want to get there.
So we'll see a law that is pretty bipartisan, everyone agrees with, that's going to help clarify that.
Well, I hope so. You know, I think this bill passed 74-2, which is unheard of, I think, anywhere else in the nation. But here in Hawaii, where we pay 3 times the national average for energy because we rely on so much imported fossil fuels, it's sort of a no-brainer to really get away from that. And so I think that's why you've seen overwhelming support to date and why I expect we'll continue to get it going into the future.
And you mentioned energy storage because that's an important part of our reaching the 100% goal. What might be some of the bills that we need to promote energy storage?
Well, you know, it's we're just at the forefront of what energy storage can do for our grid. You know, we've had a lot of folks in the past 10 years move from a situation where there's virtually zero solar panels on people's roofs to now where it's everywhere. And that's something that's just starting to happen. The technology for storage of batteries is getting to a point where it's cost effective and it's being installed now in people's homes And this is something that's pretty exciting. So I think what we want to do is help that conversation move forward, help incentivize the transition from just installing solar panels to installing perhaps solar plus batteries, to allow people to be a little more independent in their energy use and consumption. And so there's a few bills with regard to incentives, with regard to setting targets for where we want to be with our grid down the road and have more storage and have more capacity to put more renewables on it. That'll probably make sense.
Richard, what is one of those bills that Blue Planet has been working on for promoting energy storage?
For several years now, we've suggested that energy storage today is sort of where solar was, say, 6 or 8 years ago. And one of the things that really accelerated that solar boom that we've seen, that has allowed so many people to save money with solar power, were to use tax incentives in a smart way. We'd like to see energy storage now use those same sorts of strategies. If we can put as much storage onto the grid as we have solar in the past few years, I really think we'll be well beyond where we thought we could be when it comes to clean energy. So I think the tax credit might be a key bill to look for in this session.
Can you explain how the tax credit will work?
Sure. I have to heed the warning not to get too technical. The simplest version is that there are federal tax credits available for renewable energy. And this means if you spend, say, $10,000 on a solar system, you can actually get a credit back on your tax bill at the end of the year for 30 or 35% of that amount. In Hawaii, we've decided to supplement that federal tax credit with a state tax credit as well. When it comes to energy storage, the rules are a little bit unclear about how that would work. Sometimes you can get the federal tax credit, sometimes you can't. It turns out that the state tax credit isn't available at all for energy storage in the way it is for the federal credit. So the idea, I think, would be to align the federal approach with the state approach, and it becomes just as simple as I install my solar system, but I make it a smart solar system, and I get a big tax credit back at the end of the year that helps me pay for that system.
So, Representative Lee, what does the utility need to do in order to support this 100% goal and to support the promotion of energy storage that we know is an important step towards that goal?
You know, it's a bit of a difficult situation because I think both the utility and government policy is really trailing what's happening out in the marketplace right now with new innovative technology. And you have batteries, you have PV, you have all kinds of things that are coming down in cost so much faster than anybody expected and are being adopted out there in the marketplace so much faster than anyone expected. So I think for now, the question is not necessarily what the utility does today, but where do we ultimately want to go? What does the utility of the future, that 21st century utility, look like that we ought to shoot for down the road? I think we can continue to react to changes in the marketplace and changes in technology, but if we don't set a clear direction starting now, we won't know where to make the big investments. And a lot of investments need to be made in the grid, and a lot of homeowners are going to be putting money into things. We have a lot of incentives coming forward. But the first step, I think, before anything else is figuring out what that utility of the future looks like and working backward from there.
And one of the ways in which we can do that, right, is through some strategic collaborative planning. And I know that's one thing that Blue Planet has worked on with utility performance changing of our bill structure to promote performance customer pricing. Can you explain that better than I just did?
I can try. So I think if we really boil this down to simple terms, the question we're asking is how does a utility make money? The utility revenue system that we have here in Hawaii today is our 19th century system, and it really doesn't match with the 20th or 21st century grid that we're trying to build. The utility makes money in a very interesting way. It's a cost plus contract, if you will, which I think most people have heard of. If a certain amount of money is spent on the grid, is spent on generating energy, then the utility gets that amount of money back plus some profit. And if you think about what that incentivizes, I mean, it incentivizes spending a lot of money on big infrastructure projects, which is a little bit different than the distributed future that Representative Lee described, where lots of people are being involved in the grid and lots of people are generating energy or storing energy. So if we change this revenue model from cost plus to a revenue model that specifically allows the utility to make some more money when they enable other people to give us clean energy, and maybe the utility makes a little less money when they're giving us coal energy, for example, or oil-powered energy, we feel like those sorts of incentives can align the customer interests, the state interest in clean energy, and allow the utility to have a business model that flourishes for all of us.
That sounds like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think Richard's spot on. You know, it's really trying to figure out what incentivizes the utility to act in the best interest of everybody, and trying to align those incentives with the end goal where we want to be down the road here. And that's sort of, I think, what needs to be tackled this coming year.
It sounds like a very complex model for how to incentivize utility. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because I'm having trouble making sure I understand what that means on my actual bill.
I'm happy to provide one example, and maybe it'll give you a jumping off point. One thing to realize is that a huge portion of our electricity bill is fuel costs. It's just paying for the oil that we burn to generate electricity. And right now, the way this revenue model works is 100% of those fuel costs get passed through to the customer. So the utility itself doesn't have any skin in the game when it comes to reducing the amount of oil we burn. So how might we change that? Well, we could say the utility would be on the hook if it burns oil at a price above X. And maybe the utility gets a little bit money back if it burns oil or burns less oil below some number Y. I think that's a really good example of an incentive that's baked right in. I don't want more and more oil being sort of pushed through onto my electricity bill, but I have no mechanism to make my voice heard right now. So if the revenue model actually meant that there was money in reducing oil usage for the utility, I think we'd find that outcome came about pretty quickly.
So the good news is it actually wouldn't impact my bill. It doesn't mean I would be paying any more for my electricity. I might actually pay less.
I think right now, I mean, what folks are finding, and I'm really glad this conversation is coming up in this particular time, because I think this year Hawaii's focused more on energy policy and energy and bills and where we're going than perhaps any time in our history, which is fantastic. And it's going to take that public outreach to really demand that we go to a place that is beneficial for everybody, the environment, for our economy, for consumers locally. And so I think what that's going to mean, though, is that we've got to change sort of the long-standing status quo of regulation, utility regulation, which Richard had alluded to. I mean, right now utilities are compensated for putting in infrastructure, for things like that aren't necessarily aligned with perhaps a consumer-driven end goal. And so from your perspective as a consumer right now, I think it's clear that the Public Utilities Commission has said perhaps we are overpaying for some of these services that aren't necessarily aligned with what customers really want. So how do we change that so that we aren't paying extra dollars for the utility to invest in infrastructure that we might not necessarily benefit from, but instead make sure the utility is being compensated only for achieving the end output, which means lower prices for consumers, renewable energy for consumers, and ultimately changing the way it does business so that we align ourselves with the advances in new technology that allows everybody to take advantage and save collectively overall.
Well, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, I'd like to continue this conversation about a consumer-driven solution to our renewable energy goals. We'll be right back.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching Think Tech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with Think Tech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together, because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas, and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on Think Tech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
Hi, this is Kirsten Baumgart-Turner with Sustainable Hawaii, and we're back with Representative Chris Lee and Richard Wallsgrove. We had a great conversation before the break about this consumer-driven model for making our utility perform to what the market demands. Richard, you had a good point during the break. Would you share that again with our audience?
Sure. I think that what we're seeing is a shift to having more and more customer choices. It used to be your electricity showed up when you turned on the switch, and you got a bill for it once a month. But now with things like solar panels and electric vehicles and the batteries that Representative Lee talked about, consumers have a lot more technology choices that they can make. Naturally, people will choose things that save them money. I think that in Hawaii, we'll often choose things that are better for our environment. The more we have a utility revenue model that really gets the utility invested in making those options available to people, I think the better off all consumers are, and less money we'll spend on electricity ultimately.
That's terrific, and I hope that our viewers will all turn out and support whatever bill that you decide to push through from your committee. I want to turn now, because we have limited time, to the 100% renewable energy goal for transportation. Explain to us what's happening in the legislature regarding that.
I know last year was a big year. We didn't only do the 100% goal for electricity, but also for transportation. There was a bill that changed our long-term planning for the state to say we want to be completely free of fossil fuels for ground transportation. And that's something that's going to take a little bit longer to get there, because transportation makes up about 2/3 of our energy consumption. But I mean, we're seeing collaboration now between the Department of Transportation, the State Energy Office, and all stakeholders to try and figure out what steps need to be taken to get us off fossil fuels. That means more EVs, more alternative forms of transportation, better biking, better pedestrian infrastructure. All these things that I think together can help set the stage for a total revolution away from what we sort of thought was the status quo in the 20th century, and move into one in which we actually truly are 100% clean.
And I know one of those visions is to have EVs at the rail stations, and we have a great graphic that demonstrates what could be for your 21st century model. Could you show that slide, Suri? The EV electric connections.
And it's not just EVs, I should add.
Yeah, this is the storage, and this is also something that's possible along the rail line. Is that correct, or and there's also another one with the electric vehicles plugged in. There we go.
Yeah, this is exciting, and it's not just along the rail line, but I mean, you can use EVs essentially as storage capacity pretty much anywhere on the grid. Right now, and it's not just EVs, you have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that are coming online. The Mirai, the Toyota Mirai, just began sales in Japan and around the country. I think California has them as well. But Hawaii we're the second state to get them. We've got a few on island already that are going to go on sale shortly. But they are 100% clean. They use hydrogen, and they put out water, and they drive you where you're going to go. But the neat thing about them is that in Japan, they actually have a plug where you can take the plug from the vehicle, plug it into your house, and run your house off your car. And that's something that we haven't seen here yet, but it completely changes the game and allows us to really move into that decentralized grid of the future, where you have a nexus between transportation and the utility side coming together so that we can all benefit, and you can get best energy consumption out of it all.
I know you mentioned the hydrogen vehicles, and there have been vehicle demonstrations on the military bases for a number of years now, supported by federal funding. One of the things that interests me is how that's going to translate to the wider population, and particularly where we're going to be producing our hydrogen. We have Stan, the energy man, who talks a lot about this, but for our viewers who haven't tuned in to Stan, can you tell us a little bit more about where that is going in Hawaii? Either of you chime in.
Sure. You know, we've got Stan Osterman is our hydrogen czar. So he's leading the show, trying to get more infrastructure in place, and we've got a number of fleet vehicles that are like the first target of opportunity. Big buses, tour buses, all the Wiki shuttle at the airport, and a lot of rental cars. All could be converted relatively soon. And that's something Stan's working on right now. We're putting up hydrogen fueling stations in a couple places around the state, and those are going to be taking, hopefully, power from solar panels and converting it into hydrogen to be used for fuel, for transportation. And hydrogen, I mean, it's a fascinating thing, because unlike EVs, which at least with the current technology, you get about a little more than 100-mile range out of your typical, say, Leaf or other vehicle, and it takes you a handful of hours to charge. Hydrogen, on the other hand, takes you 5 minutes to put into your car. You get 300+ miles range out of it. It's like a gas car with all the benefits of an EV, and that's something that could really start to change the game.
So the production could be distributed if it's coming from solar in particular. So it could come right off our rooftop solar?
I'll tell you what's exciting about hydrogen is that when you burn it, you make water. we can make hydrogen from water. All you need is some electricity and some water. So we could make it from rooftop solar panels. You know, here in Hawaii, sometimes we have more wind power than we can actually use at a given time. So that extra wind power could actually be used for making hydrogen. You could make it from geothermal power on the Big Island. So you're right, we could be making hydrogen at all sorts of places all around the grid, and that could be used to fuel our cars.
Are we going to see a bill this year that would help promote that? Are we ready for that?
I think there's been a couple of bills in the years past. There's a couple of easy fixes that need to happen. I mean, if you look at fuel cell vehicles, I mean, they're basically EVs, electric motors on all four wheels, but instead of a battery powering it, there's a fuel cell. And providing the same incentives that EVs have for hydrogen vehicles, letting them use the HOV lane and have parking benefits and whatnot to help move the technology forward and incentivize people to switch over, I think is something that's a no-brainer.
I know that's a bill that you sponsored in the past. Is that going to come up again in this session and get passed?
I hope so. I hope
Okay.
so. We're working on it now.
Good, good. And what does Blue Planet see in terms of its policy agenda for hydrogen?
Well, it's an interesting question because in a lot of ways, there isn't anything different about hydrogen than an electric vehicle or other forms of clean transportation. What we're talking about is the way energy moves around in our economy. And we just have to make sure that there are the appropriate mechanisms in place for people to make these sorts of choices, like hydrogen. I'll give you an example. I think I'm allowed to share this. JTB, the Japanese tour company that we see their buses driving around on Oahu all the time, they actually have a plan to swap out their whole fleet for a hydrogen fleet. So what can we do to make that a little bit more attractive for JTB to actually make it happen sooner, to make it easier for them to do it? One of the things we could do is we could make it so that they can buy electricity for a little bit less money to make the hydrogen at times when we have lots of extra solar power available to us. So although it sounds like we need a hydrogen-specific bill, it turns out that maybe just having these utility incentives on the grid in place might be enough to have all of these other mechanisms come into play that just make hydrogen that little bit more competitive in our market sooner rather than later.
So creating those utility incentives would really be in the arena of the Public Utilities Commission and helping to change the rate structure?
Certainly. Well, it is something that our legislators can do. They can say that this is a policy outcome we'd like to see. It always falls on the Public Utilities Commission to implement these things, which is not an easy job. But our Public Utilities Commission has been looking at this issue for a few years, and I think the time might be right for that as one of our policy agendas. And it would spring open transportation solutions, clean energy solutions, storage solutions, customer choices. I mean, it really could be revolutionary.
I know one of the other revolutionary things that Representative Lee, you've been supporting is rooftop solar for the public school system. And I know that there is a bill brewing about helping to move that along, and you helped Lanikai School get the funding to cover their rooftops. Tell us a little bit more about that initiative.
Yeah, you know, Lanikai was one of the first schools. We covered the school with PV, and they were one of the first examples of not only being mostly off-grid at that point, but also incorporating that new technology into their curriculum so kids could really understand what this means to be sustainable, to be able to save money, and to be able to do it in a clean way. And right now, in fact, this past year, we just did a bill that makes the University of Hawaii's system, all, I think, 11 campuses, be the first in the country to be completely net zero, producing as much renewable energy as they consume. And so they've got a target of doing that in 20 years. And they're really getting started. They've got a lot of projects in the pipe. At the Department of Education, we have not only a problem with just energy costs, but we also have a problem with cooling classrooms. And this is something where there's a lot of overlap. So we can put in PV panels, not only just to power the school, but also to power a new air conditioning system so that taxpayers are on the hook for a higher electric bill in the long run. So we can do this in a sustainable and clean way that makes economic sense all at the same time.
And it's ironic because it's actually the climate change impacts that are heating up our communities that are requiring the air conditioning, and now we're having to find those solutions to create the energy that doesn't in turn contribute more to climate warming. So it is a great model of how we are a closed loop system naturally, and we need to find those closed loop solutions as well. So I applaud you for making that as an example. I know that we've also had some great examples in our private school, particularly with Punahou School when they built the new Wilcox Center and the Case Middle School. So it's great to see somebody stepping out and really championing the public school initiatives. Is there going to be a bill for funding for that this year?
I think there may not be a specific bill saying we want to put money to this specific school or anything like that, but I think we can send strong signals and directives to the Department of Education and through the budget to say, all the new stuff you're doing, the school renovations, the new campuses you're building, the new technology you're putting in place, do it right. Do it sustainably, do it taking advantage of the latest technology to produce power at the school so that we don't have to buy it from a utility based off of fossil fuels being burned somewhere else. That's something I think that we can do and we're working on right now.
Well, we're going to go to another break, and when we come back, we have a couple more items on our agenda for the legislative session. We'll be right back with Representative Lee.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. I'm host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is our flagship show, which plays 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. And the supporters of that show are Hawaii Energy Policy Forum and Hawaii Energy. And luckily enough, we have representatives of both of them right here today to tell you more about what they think about the show. Sharon Moriwaki at my left is co-chair of Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and she goes first. Sharon?
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I'm so glad that we have this Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. This was 2 years ago when we started this, and we have continued it because it's so important, and there's so many developments happening across the state, and we hope you'll tune in every Wednesday, 4 to 5. It's wonderful.
And Ray is Hawaii Energy. Ray, what is your thought about the same subject?
Well, I agree completely with Sharon that we are talking about every Wednesday, 4 to 5. We talk about some of the most important subjects that are affecting the islands now and into the future. Energy, clean energy, we need it. We often run into new ideas that we had not thought about before. We did just today, and I think we're going to have more of that in the future. So come on down and watch us 4 to 5 on Wednesdays, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha.
Hi, we're back with Sustainable Hawaii, and we have a tweet coming in from Hawaii Energy Group. How do we reach 100% goal when renewables are still too expensive for the common man? Not everyone is a homeowner, they point out. Representative Lee, would you like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom is that for years now, you had to be pretty wealthy to be able to afford to put solar on your roof or certainly batteries or anything else. But today, that's starting to change. Not only are prices coming down, and there's innovative financing available for anyone to take advantage, but there are programs we're putting in place right now to really open that up to anybody, even if you don't have your own roof. One of the things that Blue Planet has really been working on and championed over the last few years that we passed into law last year was community solar, which allows anybody anywhere to take advantage of renewable energy technology like PV, even if they don't have a roof, even if they live in a condo, and sometimes even if they're not even a homeowner. So I'll let Jeff jump into that. I mean, they really got to give the credit where credit is due.
Community solar is a really exciting concept. It's taken off in about, I'm going to say 12 or 15 states already. Every day I open the paper and it seems like a new state has adopted some form of this program. And the concept, just as Representative Lee described it, is that there's no real reason that we need to have a roof to have rooftop solar PV. I could have my panels sitting on a warehouse somewhere in Kapolei, and I can get the benefit of that energy. This is really that distributed system that Representative Lee described. We can have energy coming onto our grid from all sorts of different places. I think the first thing we can say is that we can have a program that eliminates the need to have a roof. Start with that. The question then becomes, well, how do we make sure that everybody can afford it? How do we make sure that the utility is actually integrating this new form of renewable energy all over the grid? And so the bill we worked on last year essentially said this needs to happen. Our legislators gave the policy directive. This makes sense for Hawaii. At our high energy costs, it makes economic sense for Hawaii. It's consistent with our renewable energy goals. The tricky part now is the details. We had a proposal from the utility on how to do this about 2 or 3 months ago now. The proposal, in my view, was a little bit too timid. It was small. It was about 1/10 the size of our current rooftop solar program. About 1/10 the size then would be carved off for this community solar concept. It was dictating how it should happen. I mean, this is a real area for innovation. Lots of companies with new ideas about how to make this happen are operating on the mainland. We'd like them to operate here. So we're working with the utility, we're working with lots of other stakeholders, and trying to convince the Public Utilities Commission that this community solar concept can take place very, very soon in a way that is broad, open, expansive, innovative, that everybody is participating in.
So the legislation is in place. What's required now are the rules and the model for how this is going to be rolled out?
That's right. That's right. Although there is room for legislation to dictate some of those answers. If the legislature doesn't like what it's seeing from the utility or from the stakeholders, certainly this was a creature from the legislature. They could give us new direction and maybe some more specificity.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say I think it's pretty clear the utility has sort of thrown the brakes on this, trying to perhaps keep control. The problem is that you want more competition. You want to be able to have people compete for projects so that we get the lowest cost and the best technology available. But I think that's something that needs to be clarified, because what was submitted by the utility in this rulemaking process doesn't match the intent of what the legislature had in mind. And I think almost every stakeholder who'd been working on this bill along with the utility along the way now have the same exact concerns. We want to make sure this happens soon. We don't want to wait another 10 years while the utility continues to put up roadblocks. It needs to happen. And if we don't have a utility that ultimately is going to step up to the plate and be proactive in trying to pursue a better future for us all, then we got to start having a different question about, all right, who else do we get to fill their shoes?
That's a great challenge, and I love that discussion, and I hope that we'll have a show just on that topic itself. One of the things that you've also mentioned this year is the elimination of fossil fuels completely. Obviously, that's part of the 100% renewable goal. We currently have coal as part of our imports in addition to oil. How would we see a coal-free Hawaii, and what kind of legislation do we need for that?
The time is right for this. At the risk of getting too technical again, I'll tell you that we have a huge coal generation plant on the island.
And I have a graphic to show how that coal is unloaded on the off-ramps in Campbell Industrial Park.
It's pretty shocking. When people, this is one of the things when I talk about energy with folks, they're always surprised to learn that we're offloading coal from ships into a giant pile out there in Campbell Industrial Park. It makes up about 15% of our energy is coming from that coal. It's the dirtiest form of energy I can think of. It turns out that contract for that coal power expires in the year 2022. Seems pretty far off, but time is flying. I think we all know that coal is not part of our renewable energy future. So I think today we can draw a line in the sand and say after 2022, it doesn't make sense to have any more coal here on Oahu or in Hawaii.
Are we going to see a bill sponsored to call for the end of coal by 2022? No new contracts?
Yeah, I think in part, I mean, you've got multiple things moving that push this direction, not only direct legislative action, but ultimately our RPS, which is already in place, which we're hoping to clarify again.
Our renewable portfolio standards.
That's right, that 100% goal. We work backward from that. This has got to be phased out. Sooner the better. And I think we've got all kinds of exciting options to replace it, and that's the key. You know, the more you have these large centralized plants like the coal plant, which we have had power outages from, most of our, I think, major power outages have come from these centralized plants failing from time to time. The more we can move toward batteries, the more we can move toward hydrogen, the more we can move toward sustainable renewable energy. That not
With
only
redundant systems, you're saying, so that we're not so dependent on one major installation.
That's right. It's an energy security issue in the long run for sure, and we're all going to be better off for it.
Terrific. So I'm looking forward to that bill, and we'll make sure our audience is reminded of it and can weigh in on their support for that bill. One of the interesting things that for Hawaii, and one of the reasons I had both of you come on the show, is the interaction between the nonprofit sector, the customers, the public sector, the legislature, all different, the different houses of government in finding these solutions. So I wondered if you can talk a little bit about how you've been making pathways to coming up with these innovative solutions in this collaborative approach that's not just government or not just activists working against government, but we seem to be coming to a much more collaborative state in Hawaii. Can you comment on that?
Sure. I think one of the things we saw with, for example, the 100% renewable portfolio standard last year was that pretty much everybody came in support, from the utilities on one side to the average person, and a lot of school kids coming in saying, we need to do this. And that was because of a lot of hard work trying to get people to understand why these issues are important. I think Blue Planet did a lot of outreach on that, and the bill is really their baby. I mean, we owe them much for it. And moving forward now, I think that same kind of approach needs to happen. You need to have people engaged. You need to have the media covering these issues. You need to have people understanding what their electric bill means, not only for them right up front in their pocketbook, but for our environment, for their kids, for their future. And that's something that I really thank you for, because this is part of that process.
And I know a big part of the process has been Hawaii Green Growth, which is the collaborative effort between all the sectors of Hawaii society and government to pull together to identify what all of our natural resource and environmental protection as well as energy goals can be to help mitigate climate change. You were very instrumental in supporting the Aloha Plus Challenge with its major goals in all these areas that was adopted into Hawaii law. And I know that you have promoted natural resource preservation and support of the Department of Land and Natural Resources in its effort to implement some of the goals. Another thing is on the food security issue. So can you comment a little bit on the Aloha Plus Challenge, that collaborative effort, and your focus within that this year?
Yeah, you know, I think in Hawaii, everybody knows our economy is our environment, and our way of life and our culture is based around our access to our natural resources, whether it's a beach or volcanoes in the Big Island or anything. And especially now with climate change really challenging us, you know, taxpayers, all of us, our families, are paying millions of dollars already every year to try and protect our beaches, to try and protect our agriculture sector, to try and stave off the worst effects of climate change. And so the more we can do to be a little more sustainable ourselves, to preserve our natural resources, our fresh water supply, that's less money we have to spend in the long run, and that's a better future we give our kids. And so what the Aloha Plus Challenge focuses on is identifying key areas: clean energy, local food production, natural resources, things that we want to save, and gives a very basic metric that everybody can understand. How are we doing on our goal toward a 100% renewable future? And so we can identify the challenges in each area and make sure that we live up to those standards, not just us who are here today, but the next generation of folks who are going to be carrying on in these footsteps. And that's something that I think is critical for folks to understand and really prioritize in terms of importance to the state.
So in order to make that happen this year, Richard, what are some of the priorities that Blue Planet has for on the energy side that you focus on?
Well, our priority never changes. Our unwavering priority is we want 100% clean and sustainable energy for Hawaii. The neat thing about working in energy is that energy touches all of these sectors that you mentioned. So every time that we come across perhaps a farm bill, there's a way for farmers to save money by using clean energy. There's a way to use our farm infrastructure, the way water is pumped or stored, to support clean energy. It's difficult for me to tell you what priorities are. We're going to see, I think, tomorrow and in the coming days what the legislative bills are that we could support. We'll try to figure out what the connections are between all of those different sectors, and then we'll start to highlight the real sort of top issues for us. I can tell you that things like electrifying transportation, ending the use of coal here in Hawaii, making solar power accessible to everybody, and then making sure that 100% renewable energy means 100% renewable energy, those will float to the top no matter which bills we're discussing.
Well, as we close our very short time here, because I look forward to having so much more time with you, Representative Lee, would you look into this camera and challenge your constituents, actually all of Hawaii, what you would like us to do to help move the dial forward to accomplish our sustainability agenda for Hawaii?
Yeah, you know, I think
Right in there.
speaking to my constituents, I represent the Kailua and Waimanalo area. Folks are doing pretty good out there. I think a lot of people have taken to heart what it means to want a better future for our kids. But I challenge the rest of the state, in particular, to step up to the plate. You know, we all are in this together. We will sink or swim together as one state and one group of islands. So it's up to you guys to step forward and tell us as legislators, to tell your legislators, to tell folks like Richard and everyone else around here what it means to be sustainable and to have a future that is viable for our next generation. That's going to be key, and that means getting involved not only in politics, but involved in issues. I find a win for me, and I can say this to everybody, a win for me isn't necessarily passing one issue on any given day. It's engaging somebody else to fight right next alongside me. Because win or lose, you double your army. You double the amount of folks who are involved in something, and that's the win, because eventually you're going to get there. So if you can build those bridges, I challenge you all to get involved. That's the win for Hawaii.